what exactly did the Apostle Paul teach us concerning adultery? And did he give people a way out of, did he overthrow what Jesus had to teach? And so we can just work our way through the chapter of First Corinthians chapter 7 and explore those possibilities and see what did he really say. Um, is there anything particularly on your heart, Tom, that you want to say right up front?
No, I'm just going to listen to you, and if I have any, because last session I asked you quite a bit of questions, so I'm not sure if I'll have any questions in this session. But um, if I think of something to ask you or want to clarify something, I'll speak up.
Right on. Okay. All right. Um, well, I'm going to just read it. And why don't I read the whole thing straight and then we'll come back and read and explain. And this is the King James Version, which is pretty helpful in a lot of ways, actually. I wish I had a modern translation that I could fully trust all the way and that's universally accepted and all that. But still, the King James Version, which is very good. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1. Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have with his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. That means lack of self-control. But I speak this by permission and not of commandment, for I would that all men were even as myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this matter, and another after that. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't just read the whole thing and then come back to it. So he's just introduced his topic.
Yeah.
Okay. He's just introduced his topic. And so I guess we'll go through it more slowly here and explain as we go because everybody can listen to an audio Bible, read it for themselves. Okay. So this is a thing that the Corinthians wrote to him. They have a question about these matters and he's working his way through there. So it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Okay. So he's using a euphemism here for it's good for a man not to, have sex with a woman, to go through his life, just free from all that. But nevertheless, to avoid fornication. Now, fornication is sex without marriage. That's what it is, sex outside of marriage. To avoid that, porneias, let every man have. That's the Strong's number 21, Greek number 2192, echetoo. Nobody knows the real pronunciation of this, so that's good enough. And that means to possess, take possession of, to own. Let every man possess his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. And really, in the sense of have here, and King James uses this a lot. Have means to have sex with. So he's saying to avoid fornication, porneias, let every man have sex with his own wife, and let every woman have sex with her own husband. Now, in Greek, there really is no. It's the same word for wife or woman, the same word for man or husband. So and I'm going to go through this and simplify this when we do a different recording on this. Do it again. Let every man have sex with his own woman, and let every woman have sex with her own man. Let's just put it in those terms. And the whole purpose of this is to avoid fornication. And so everything highlighted in blue here this is the marriage obligation. Okay, this is and for in the context of sex, and the whole purpose here that is to avoid fornication. And so it's this sexual obligation that the man has to the woman, the husband has to his wife, the wife has to her husband. Let every man have sex with his own personal wife, and let every woman have sex with her own personal man, which we'll call a husband. That's her own one. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence. That word there, due, which is due benevolence, 3784, Greek Strong's number, means a debt. It's an obligation. Okay, it's an obligation, like a debt is an obligation that must be paid. Let the husband render or pay up unto the wife the debt of benevolence, this sexual debt. Likewise, also the wife to the husband. So when that's what he's defining, what the sexual obligation is of marriage, that a man commits himself to one woman. I will provide sex for you, on demand, to keep you from having sexual temptations with other, and being a fornicator, because fornicators
Hmm.
and adulterers will not inherit the kingdom of God. And likewise, the woman, when she marries a man, she's committing herself to provide sex for that one man, so that he does not, out of his lack of self-control, get tempted to fornicate with just sleeping around with a variety of people. So this is it's a contractual relationship between two people. I will provide for sex for you. You will provide sex for me. And so let the husband render unto the wife the debt, the obligation of this benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. So you're kind of like, to put it crassly, agreeing to be sex slaves to each other. Okay, and you have a
Uh-huh.
debt. I provide sex for you. You provide sex for me, and you owe it to
Yeah.
me. That's what he's describing here. The wife hath not power, exousia, that means authority over her own body. It's not talking about in all matters. It's just talking about in this matter of sex. She doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have power over his own body, but the wife. And that what that's saying is, the wife, in regards to sex, the wife doesn't get to say whether or not she'll have sex with the husband or not at any given time. The husband does. The husband says, I want sex with you, and she's got to be his servant and just say, okay, I'm not really in the mood, but since you say so, here we go. And likewise, also the husband has not power or authority over his own body, but the wife does. The wife says, I need it, and I need it now. And the husband says, I've been working all weekend. I want to go fishing. And the wife says, nope, you owe it to me. You have an obligation to me. And so Paul is saying he's got to give it to her.
Yeah.
And verse 5 is saying, defraud ye not one another. That means don't break the agreement. Don't cheat. The agreement is you're supposed to provide sex on demand when she asks for it, and she's supposed to provide sex on demand when you ask for it. And
Hmm.
that to fail to provide that is fraud. Hey, we entered into this contractual agreement. I provide for you, you provide for me, and you are not keeping your side of the bargain here. And Paul is saying, don't defraud ye not one another, except for it be for consent for a time, meaning you both agree to, okay, we're going to take a break from sex here. Okay, I'll go fishing and you go shopping. But you can't withhold sex from one another unless both agree to it, except be with consent. They both consent to it, that you give and really he's saying that you give yourselves to fasting and prayer and then come together again. Sex.
Hmm.
Why? That Satan tempt you not for your incontinency, your lack of self-control. It is really saying that incontinency really means
Uh-huh.
your neediness. Okay, so that's the basic agreement. That's the basic sexual obligation that the husband has to the wife and the wife has to the husband. Now, I've highlighted that because we're going to come back to that. That's the obligation right there. And so now the way I've arranged this is verse 6, but I speak this by permission and not of commandment. The permission, he's not talking about everything in blue about the permission. He's going all the way back up to verse 2, where he says, let every man have his own wife and let every woman have her own husband.
Hmm.
This business of marrying in the first place. I speak this by permit. I say this more as a matter of I'm permitting you to do this. I'm not commanding that everybody has to go get married. Go find a woman to marry, or you're sinning. I'm not saying that. I speak this by permission and not of commanding. I'm saying you are allowed, each of you, to find a wife or find a husband, to marry them and make this this commitment to provide sex to one another. You're allowed to do that. It's not like you're commanded to do this and you're sinning if you don't find someone to marry. And then he goes on to explain why, and that's anything that I have indented like this is kind of the explanation for this big statement he's making. Verse 7, for I would that all men were even as myself. He's unmarried, but and then he goes on to explain that. But every man has his proper gift from God, one after this manner of being single, like for Christ, like myself, Paul speaking, and another after that, married, like a lot of these other people. So he's saying there, whether you're single for Christ or married for Christ. It's a gift from God. It's a gift to be single and have all that free time and your full focus on serving God. That's a gift, and a gift from God. It's a wonderful blessing, and no one should think less of himself for that, and no one should think more highly of himself for that. It's a gift. We have different gifts, and then the other one has a gift to be married. I had to go to the other side of the planet to find my gift, and
Yeah.
so I found a good one that had never been married before, and so that was a total miracle, a gift from God, and I enjoyed. It was a blessing to be single. It's a blessing to be married. So they're both gifts from God. So he goes on to that. Now he's gonna move on. Verse 8. He has something to say. Anything in bold letters here. He says, based on what he's just finished talking about, all this blue here, based on what he just introduced about the basic sexual obligation that married people have to one another, he's going to say some things based on that. Okay, so he says, and so in bold letters here, here's a little sub unit here. I wish my little cursor was bigger so I could circle it better. But I say, therefore, to the unmarried and widows. Okay, so he's going to say something that's directed straight to this one group of people. So the book of First Corinthians is written to all the Christians at the Church of Corinth, but on this subject, he's going to single out just this one little category of people, of these Christians, and have a special word for them. And so I say, therefore, to the unmarried, agamois, that means not married, okay, and widows, meaning they were once married. So agamois sounds like people never married, and widows, meaning they were women that were once married, and their husbands have died. And so I'm going to take it that agamois, unmarried, is the Greek word for widower. Okay, widower. So I'm talking to the widower men and the widow women, people who are not married because their spouse has died. Okay, and so he's saying that to the unmarried, people who are not married, and to widows whose husband have died. So these are a class of people that are not married. It is to anyone who's alive. It is good for them if they abide, remain, even as I remain single. That's what he's saying. It's good for you just to stay the same way you are. Don't. But if they cannot contain themselves, control themselves, let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn. Okay, and so I think we all probably know what that means. And so, all the movies and country music is full of, and rock and roll songs are full of, celebrating that. Okay, so we all know what that is. And so he's saying to the unmarried, people who are eligible for marriage, who are available, who are single, to the unmarried, that would be unmarried and widows, it's good for them to remain single, unmarried, even as I am, unmarried and widowed, even as I am. Okay. But if they cannot contain themselves, they're allowed to marry. Let them marry. For it's better to marry than to burn. So we've got three levels here. We've got, it's good to be single. And then if you can't handle that, it's good to be married. Right. And then it's good to be married. Okay. And then below that is you're single and unmarried. It would be better for you to be married. So we've got three categories. You got single and living holy, married and living holy, single and not and burning. So it would be a step up for the single person who's burning to get married. Okay, so a single person has two choices: live holy or get married. Okay, because if you're going to live unholy, you're fornicating, and you need to either learn how to stop that and remain single for Christ and holy, or married and holy. Okay, so those are your choices. Verse 10. Now he's going to have some advice to the married and unto the married. So he just talked about the unmarried and widows, people who are not married to anybody who's alive. Now he's going to have a special message to the married. I command, yet not I, but the Lord Jesus. let not the wife depart from her husband. The word here is separate. And it's really the same way we use the word in the English language. There's separation. People are married and they don't divorce, but they separate. They live in separate apartments. Okay, they're separated. Now sometimes they're on their way. They're thinking about divorcing, and right now they're just living in separate apartments, but they've never gone through any divorce proceedings. And so even in American legal speak, that's separate. Okay, and so you haven't divorced, you haven't completely abandoned, you haven't given up on the marriage, you're separated, you're just living in separate homes. That's all it means. So unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not, or the wife is not allowed to, let not the wife separate, depart from her husband. Okay, don't let her go get her own apartment. But if she breaks this rule and does it anyway, and if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Okay? And let not the husband put away his wife. Tell her to go get her own apartment, separate from her. Okay? So that's here in 2 verses, the Apostle Paul just summarized everything Jesus taught about it. He just did. So he confirmed our previous video. He confirmed our previous video that said Jesus never said you can divorce and remarry. And that's a separate video. We can give a link to it in the description. And here Paul affirms that. He's a servant is not above his master. That's what Jesus said. A servant is not above his master. A disciple is not above his teacher. Paul is the disciple in that relationship between him and Jesus. And he's the servant. Jesus is the master. He's the teacher. Paul is not above Jesus, people. Okay, and he's never. You're going to find out he does not overthrow what Jesus taught in this chapter at all. He affirms it, and here he is. He's summing up what we concluded from Jesus, that this is Jesus's commandment. Let not a wife separate from her husband. But if she does separate, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband put away his wife. Nothing in there said, let her go find a new husband or let her issue a certificate of divorce or anything like that.
When we get down to verse 15, I want to prepare you. I do have some questions on it, and I like to take maybe a devil's advocate position on it, so you can explain it to me and everyone that's listening.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. It'll be good. All right, and I invite that through the whole thing. Okay, so let's see. Let's just shift all this over because all this should have been shifted over as well. This is actually a subunit of to the married. Okay, when he says, but to the rest of what? The rest of all Christians everywhere? No, to the rest of the married people. Okay, to the married people, the Lord says, let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she does anyway, because people can get hard-headed and disobedient anyway, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband put away or bid her farewell, say goodbye to his wife. That's what that Greek word actually means, put away his wife, tell her to go away. But to the rest of the married, and that means the others who are married that might be a little within this category of married people, because he's going to describe married people here, and he's saying there's a subgroup within married people that he wants to say something else. But to the rest of the married, to the rest speak I, not the Lord. So Paul's going to say, I'm going to say something the Lord didn't say. I'm going to say it under the unction of the Holy Spirit, because as he says at the end of this chapter, and I think I also have the Holy Spirit, he's going to say something that the Lord did not address, and it's going to fit perfectly inside of what Jesus already said. It won't overthrow it. It will just fit inside of it. And so it's within, Jesus built a house, and inside that house, Paul is going to show you a room. So he doesn't go outside the boundaries of what he just summarized from Jesus, but he is going to give you some details within that. But to the rest, speak I, not the Lord. If any brother, and so that's a major principle here, that's why I have it indented out a little bit. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. It's that same put her away right here.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let him bid her farewell. And the wife which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. See how it's the same word? Leave him.
Yeah.
Put away is actually the same word. So it means say goodbye. Because saying goodbye means say goodbye to the one leaving, or say goodbye as you leave. It's the same word. So we could just say, let him not say goodbye to her, and let not her say goodbye to him. All right. Leave. And then there's a little explainer why. Okay, so if any brother hath a wife that believeth not, she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband which believeth not, if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. So, okay, so the believer is not allowed to leave, to separate, to leave an unbelieving spouse. And he's saying that because, naturally the inclination would be, this unbeliever gives me a hard time every time I go to church, every time I try to do a Christian video, every time I want to study my Bible in peace or pray. Here's this unbeliever giving me a hard time. Surely it's God's will for me to leave him and just go off by myself somewhere, and so I can follow Jesus. And Paul is saying, no, not allowed to do that. Let him not put her away. You're not allowed to do that. And the wife, let her not leave the unbelieving husband. Not allowed to. The believer is not allowed to separate from, to leave, say goodbye to their unbelieving spouse. And here's, I was going to explain why. Verse 14. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they are holy. So, and he's going to address, he's going to come back, he's going to revisit this little statement here a little later. But when he says, how do you know if you won't? Yeah, he's going to revisit that right here. He says, for what knowest thou, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether you will save your wife? See, that's the whole principle here of this whole, if you're married to an unbeliever, everything he's saying about being married to an unbeliever is like, hey, God's commanding you through me to live in a way that I know it's hard for you, but it's gonna give them every opportunity to come to Christ. Okay, so he's explaining some more. But if the unbelieving, this is the one, you have a question. So let me work my way through my thoughts on this, and then we'll give you the floor. Is that cool?
Well, yeah, okay.
Okay, just so I can follow my train of thought.
But
yeah.
Can I read it and tell you what I believe about it?
Okay, all right, bring it on.
Well, like I said, I don't really believe with the arguments I'm going to make. I'm just playing devil's advocate so you can respond to it properly.
Okay, well, let me finish my little presentation on this, and then we can entertain that. Okay. So just so I can complete the train of thought here. So for the unbelieving, okay, that's all right. But if the unbelieving depart, and that's that same word up here, if she depart, right? If the unbelieving depart, he's allowed to depart. Let him depart. Let him go ahead. Just say goodbye. For a brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. God has called to speak. Well, what bondage is he talking about that they're not under? It's this right here. This sexual obligation. Sexual obligation. You're not obligated. And look, if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. This is the same exact word where let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled. And the word there means separate, meaning you're not that far away, you separated, and you'll probably come back because biology, And so, it's that same word, let not the wife depart. This isn't talking about, this isn't talking about, anything else except they get another apartment, they separate from you, and he's saying, if the unbeliever depart, just like he said right here, and if the believing wife departs, now it's right here, but if the unbelieving depart, now this is the big distinction between here, let him go, let him depart. Right here, she says, the believer's not supposed to depart, but if the unbeliever, they're an unbeliever, they're going to do whatever they want anyway. Let them depart. a brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. Or you can say, it's really, some translations will put, the brother or sister is not under obligation.
Yeah.
Obligation to what? Obligation to stay married to the person? They are under the obligation. That's not the obligation. He just finished that. The very core of this is he took all this time to explain the obligation, the sexual obligation that the husband has to the wife has to the husband. And what is he's saying here? If the unbeliever departs, and when they come back and want sex, you're not obligated to give them sex anymore. You're not here. He just finished saying, defraud ye not one another. The husband is not supposed to deprive the wife of sex when she wants it, and the wife is not supposed to defraud the husband if he wants it. And the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And that the obligation is, let the husband give sex on demand to the wife, and the wife to the husband. This is the obligation, that the marriage obligation, that marriage is all about. And so, to the rest, look at that, to the rest of the married, he's still calling them married. You're married to an unbeliever, you're still married. He's still calling them married. If the unbelieving spouse, he's still recognizing them as a spouse. If they depart, if they separate, and then come, and when they come back saying, hey, you need to give me sex. If an unbeliever does this to a believer, they leave, and when they come back, the believer is not obligated to sleep with them. Hey, I'll wash the dishes, I'll wash your clothes, I'm still your wife, whatever, but I'm not sleeping with you. You took off, I don't know where you've been. That's the obligation that the brother or sister is not obligated to. Or the man is a godly Christian man is married to a non-Christian wife, and she separates, goes honky tonking for a weekend or a trip, for and then she separates for a while, run around, and then comes back and says, hey, let's get together. And the believer's not obligated. No, I don't know where you've been. I don't want to get a sexually transmitted disease. So that's what
Yeah.
it means, not under obligation.
But what makes you so sure about that? Because for the last 500 years, or for quite some time, that the Protestant Church has referred to the verse 15 as the Pauline Exception. And to me, it's quite clear: if you have an unbelieving husband, let him depart, because we're not under bondage. And wouldn't the woman be under bondage if she wasn't allowed to remarry because her unbelieving husband departs? I mean, that would not be fair to her.
It's not calling the marriage between the husband and wife slavery.
Yeah, well, it's
because
not.
Down here, he's going to say, were you called while a slave? If you can be free, try to get free. So he's not, because that would be, if marriage was slavery, then hey, if you're married, try to get unmarried. He's not saying, but what he is saying is that the bondage there is, it's not the marriage relationship itself. It's the sexual obligation within. It's the sexual obligation within that marriage.
There's nothing in the verse that says about sex. So under bondage means that she's not forced to remain single all of her life. I mean, there's nothing in there that says about sex or anything.
Oh, yes, it does. This whole thing started by talking about sex. Here's the whole thing: to avoid fornication. Here's the whole reason. The very basis for the whole thing about all this marriage was sex from the very beginning. So no, that's why he did all this talk right up front. It's about sex, the obligation to provide sex.
Okay.
And so there's no way out of that.
So basically, the Protestant Church has been wrong about this for the last 500 years. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know if all Protestant churches have.
Well, I'm just saying in general.
But I think that's when Protestantism erupted, and a lot of good has come out of that. But due to the politics involved in the times, which were very difficult times during the Reformation period, and they needed the sponsorship of government to even just survive. There was intense pressure on them by kings who were protecting these reformers to kind of compromise here, because the very ones who were protecting the reformers against the Catholic Church that was out to kill them and burn them at the stake, these very people who were protecting the reformer people were the same ones who, like Henry VIII, wanted to have multiple wives, one after another, and they want so the reformers wanted to translate the Bible and make it available to everybody, and preach freedom from the Catholic Church, tyrannical and corrupt grip. At the same time, they were afraid for their lives and under pressure from kings who were dependent on kings to protect them. Kings who wanted to be able to divorce and remarry really bad.
So basically what you're saying, under bondage does not mean living a single lifestyle for the rest of your life. That's not what it means. Is that what you're saying?
Where it says a brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, he's definitely not saying the brother or sister is not married in such cases.
Well,
because he's got a word for that. He just used it. He started out by saying, therefore I say to the unmarried, right? The agamois. He knows that word. He just finished using it. If he wanted to say a brother or sister is not really married in such cases, he could have used that word. He didn't. He didn't use this word, is not really married. He could, because he's got a word for that. It's right there. Okay. Brother or sister. He could have said a brother or sister is agamois in such cases, is not really married.
I get it.
He could have said that. He didn't. He used a different word. He used a brother or sister is not under bondage, which means not under obligation in such cases. And what obligation is he talking about? This one that he spent so much time talking about. This is the sexual obligation.
So basically, if you let Scripture interpret Scripture, there's no such thing as the Pauline exception.
No.
Correct?
Not up to this point. Now, we've got 5 minutes to wrap this up, unfortunately, because I didn't get my membership I should have, with Zoom. But up till verse 16 that we've covered now, there is no exception. And look, Paul even goes on to say why. Well, I can't just, and you can understand why people would be wanting that, because he's already addressed it, that like, look, it's a normal inclination for a believing spouse to want to get away from that unbeliever. They're giving me a hard time. How can two walk together unless they be agreed? So the believer has a few incentives to want to get away from this unbeliever. It's understood, but Paul's not letting this be the big excuse by which they can do it. And he's saying why. Well, and Paul is saying but he is giving them relief. You're not under obligation to have sex with them when they come back around. That
makes sense.
Here, they separate and then they come back around. When they come back around, you're supposed to be reconciled. Okay, remain single, unmarried, or be reconciled. And so that's what people do. They separate, they come back, they separate, they come back. And when the unbeliever attempts this business, the believing spouse is not obligated sexually. Okay. They're not under this sexual obligation anymore.
Okay.
Now, biology's probably going to finally get the better of them. They'll say, well, all right, you've been good lately, and well, let's get it on. But
Paul said in verse 12, I speak not the Lord. So he's not speaking by commandments. So what you're saying is true. They could eventually come back together.
Yeah. And that's what people typically do. And that's also why people just say, oh, no, I can't stand it. You don't know what he's cheated on me. He's been gone. I don't know where he is. And I think he's been cheating with that lady at work. And I can't sleep with him. But that doesn't mean you're free to become somebody else's sex slave.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're free to just no, you're not free to obligate yourself to somebody else who you don't even know where they've been. Okay, all this time. It just means that, hey, you say you can't stand sleeping with this person who is your husband. He never said that they're not married anymore. He never said a brother or sister is unmarried in such cases.
Another thing too, if you
didn't use this word. Yeah.
If you do put verse 15 as a Pauline exception, then everything Jesus said about the subject, you would just have to throw in the garbage. So That's what's problematic about the Pauline exception.
That's exactly right. It would totally have a student overthrowing his master, a servant overthrowing his master, a student overthrowing his teacher. Just make everything Jesus said meaningless. And he just said that to the married, I command, yet not I, the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she departs anyway, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Those are only options: remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband do the same to the wife, put her away, But to the rest, speak I. So it's within the context of this, married people. I'm going to say something about a special subgroup of married people, the people who are married to an unbeliever. We've got 1 minute, 30 seconds, and then this will be this first half of this chat. We can fire it up again for the next half. Or we can pick it up another time. But to the rest, okay, married people, the rest of the married people who are special cases who are married to an unbeliever. If a brother has a wife that believeth not and she's happy to live with him, please let him not say goodbye to her, put her away, ask her to leave. And the wife which has a husband which believes not, and if he's pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him or ask him to leave. Okay, and here's explaining why. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else your children are unclean, but now they are holy. But, it's just like here, but if the unbeliever departs, just like it said right here, but if the wife departs, right? But if the unbeliever departs, meaning despite the rules, people break them anyway. If they depart, let them depart. But here's the one thing: a brother or sister who's married to an unbeliever is not obligated to have sex with them again, whereas the believer is. Be reconciled, forgive, be reconciled. And here's why.
Yeah.
For what do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O man, whether you'll save your wife? So he doesn't say brother or sister is not married in such cases. And so he didn't use this word, and he's explaining why he didn't use that word. Hey, this sounds tough. Hey, how do you know if you won't save your wife or save your husband?